Mark Toby second, because that actually isn't the way it worked. That Toby was making field paintings before Pollock did, and they had quite different influences. But you know, if you saw this work from a distance, you might confuse it at times. So I just have a different relationship to that work in terms of my the historical construct that I've put together for myself as to, you know, how I got here and got to doing what I'm doing based on the work of the past, has these people integrated into that narrative that the rest of us share.
Right. So this is Broadway, 1935. Toby did it for several years, a series of urban scenes. Broadway, which is in the collection of the Met. Oh, this is a diagram, which I thought was interesting in relationship to your drawings, Jim. You know, Broadway Norm, which is in a Seattle collection. It's an interesting one you said you hadn't seen from 35. So it's interesting also to think about Toby going in and out of abstraction and figuration.
You know, he would go to the public market and sit and draw people, kind of like the Ashcan school artists would have done. And he did some kind of Ashcan school-like things as well as these abstract things in the 30s.
I mean, this is, E. Pluribus, which is at the, you know, which is also at the Seattle Art Museum.
Yeah, I might have seen this one, and it's very small. It's 20 by 24.
Yeah, Electric Night.
Yeah, I guess the thing that got me was that his work. I never thought of these as abstract. I mean, some of his. He did do some paintings which I would say are abstract, and you know, maybe this is close to one, but there's still imagery in this painting. There's a sort of structure to it that's based on landscape or cityscape.
Yeah, Universal City, and this one reminds me a lot of your black and red calligraphy, you know, and the whole. I mean, Mark Toby's white writing. White calligraphy, you know, which he lifted pretty much right out of, you know, Eastern.
Well, yeah, well, he went and studied in Japan, studied traditional Japanese calligraphy and painting.
So yeah, here are two works. One, the black and white one, which would have been in Seattle at the time. But I think it's interesting, the one on the left, these are 1967, but the use of tempera, you know, to get a sense of what his tempera palette was like. I think you can see. So that's Toby. Morris Graves, another one of the sort of Northwest Coast mystics, always finding a sort of a natural form, birds, moon glow. These are the two, Kenneth Callahan and Guy Anderson, both in their studios. I mean, together, the four of them are pretty much the center of the Northwest Coast mystics.
Yeah, neither of them were as well known as Toby or Graves. Graves was the one that really had the biggest career. Toby was always bitter. You know, he
a Stagmeister.
Yeah, he was just he was a kind of a bitter, nasty guy, I guess, is where he ended up. But
this is Callahan. Right, 65.
Yeah, these are the ones that Hofmeister is the one that turned me on to these guys.
Right, and that's where I wanted to get to. This is Guy Anderson, yeah. And you can see this is both circa 50. They're going in and out of abstraction and figuration quite freely.
Yeah, and some of the Bay Area people, we were talking earlier about this, and some of the Bay Area artists did the same thing around that time. As abstraction became prevalent, some artists decided to return to figuration with a different perspective, like David Park or Elmer Bischoff. Or,
yeah, so these are two of those, and these are interesting in relationship to like the Northwest Coast, you know, totems.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of hokey. I mean, you know, there's a, I mean, you know, there's something wonderful about some of these paintings, and then you know, it seems like too many of them, and it just all sort of falls apart for me. I don't know.
This is your life, Jim. Remember?
I know. We you know, I wouldn't have necessarily chose to go here, but you know, I'm with you. I'm with you, Hamza.
I do need you. This is Andy Hofmeister, who was one of Jim's teachers in Washington State Pullman. And these are works, acrylic on paper, opaque watercolor on paper. And this was your door into the Northwest Coast mystics. It was through him that you, in terms of, so that he was your kind of primary conduit into abstraction. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about his methods.
Well, Andy was a kind of a character, and everybody knew him. He was an effusive guy. He actually taught modern art history, so I learned my modern art history from Andy. And Andy knew some New York painters, and he also knew about the mystics. And so when he taught the class, he kind of integrated these things. In his watercolor class, he had these tricks where he would, paint some really dark ground, some really dark color on a wet big piece of watercolor paper, and then he'd take a wadded up newspaper, and he'd just kind of jam it on the surface, and it'd leave these, kind of naturalistic kind of forms, and he'd sit and draw into them and stuff, and that's how he developed his imagery and how he did his work. And he got that from Kenneth Callahan. If you were to look at certain signature Callahan pieces, you'd see that method, whereas Callahan would get really classical about it and start turning him into, I don't know, some kind of Greek battle or something, and Andy was a little more playful with it. His usually stayed naturalistic in terms of the forms and things in it, but it was just a shtick. It was a trick that he did to entertain us in the watercolor class that went directly back to this sort of tradition, or young tradition at that time, I guess, of the Northwest mystic stuff. And so
these are, I think, with the exception of the one in the upper right, that's from 1994. These are all 1989 Hofmeisters. But to say he's pretty much holding the torch of a Toby white writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to me, because I mentioned Andy to Hamza when we were talking. He was doing the blurb for the poster, and I mentioned Andy Hofmeister. I don't think I've ever actually mentioned him to anybody, and so Hamza, ended up writing about it. And as soon as I saw his name pop up in the writing, I started Googling him, and I thought he died a long time ago. I was in the last class that he taught, but he just died last year. He's been in Montana painting these paintings all this time. He grew up in Montana, and he has his place in Montana, and I feel a little sad about it now.
So, a total shift in gears. And then on the other hand, there was Galen Hansen, right? So for those who aren't familiar with Galen Hansen, quite well known in the Northwest, but was associated with the West Coast Fung School. So William T. Wiley, Robert Arneson, with Galen Hansen sort of staking his claim with recognizable Western imagery, mountains, bison. What is it? The Colonel. That's the character that he would develop.
The idea was that the stuff was as corny as he could make it. I mean, he searched for the most corny subject matter he could find.
So these are all circa 1970.
And so the Colonel was spelled with a K.
Yeah. Calling out.
Galen was, I'll own Galen, he was my mentor, right? So when I actually decided to come to Chicago to study, one of the reasons was to get away from his sphere of influence, because I had really internalized his aesthetic. Now my paintings didn't look, I could look back and see that my paintings didn't look, they already kind of looked a little like my paintings, but nonetheless, I felt that he was always in my studio looking over my shoulder no matter what I was doing. So I figured I'd come here to get as far away from him as I could.
This is all Galen. And this is his cicada period, locust period. Yeah.
I was really, it's interesting.
There's the Colonel.
Galen was an accomplished abstract expressionist, which, if to continue this kind of abstraction figuration thing, is Hamza, you were telling me he's having a show or a retrospective 30 years or something?
Yeah, 3 decades of painting, which obviously would only